You've probably heard of the Wolf of Wall Street and the suit-wearing, high-flying investors.
Me, the little man.
But what if I told you about a man who secured financial freedom in an entirely different uniform? Not in a suit, but with a mop in hand and steel-toe shoes scuffed from years of walking hallways. To most, he was invisible, just a janitor, just another face no one remembered. But underneath that humble exterior was a legacy no one saw coming. He wasn't just mopping floors, he was crafting a financial empire behind the scenes. By the time he was 92 years old, Ronald Read had built an $8 million fortune all by himself, with just the help of discipline, patience, and humility. But you may be wondering exactly how did he do it? This is the story of how a humble janitor with no formal education or wealth turned into a life of simplicity, into a powerful example of what's truly possible. Ronald Read was born in 1921 in rural Vermont. He grew up during the Great Depression on a small farm where hard work wasn't optional, it was survival. After serving in World War II, he came home to live a simple life in Brattleboro, Vermont. Upon his return to his hometown, he got the right to work as a gas station attendant at a service station. He worked at the same gas station for the next 34 years, and even when he retired from that, he wasn't done working. He picked up a broom and became a janitor at JCPenney. His life was the definition of modest. He lived in a modest house and drove an old pickup for decades. He wore flannel shirts held together by love and repetition. Nothing about Ronald Read screamed wealth. In fact, nothing even whispered it. He made coffee at home, patched his own clothes, and rarely treated himself to anything lavish. When he did splurge, it was usually for breakfast at his favorite diner, and even then he used coupons. Neighbors saw a man content with less, but for decades, this quiet, unassuming man had a secret. While the world around him obsessed over image and extravagance, Ronald Read was doing something quietly radical. He was becoming one of the richest men in town, but what was Ronald doing to maintain his mystery? Ronald wasn't poor, he was patient. While others spent, he invested. While others tried to look rich, he quietly became rich. And that simplicity, it wasn't a limitation. It was his greatest advantage. He didn't have a degree in finance. He never worked on Wall Street, but he had something far more powerful: curiosity, discipline, and time. Ronald acquired a library card and started borrowing piles of books every week, studying them with enthusiasm. In fact, he fell in love with a very particular newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. Ronald loved going to the library, so he'd always drive there or ask one of his stepchildren to take him. He'd spend hours and hours studying about the stock market and investments until he was able to tell which companies were worth putting his money into. He wasn't interested in flashy trends or risky bets. He believed in real companies, ones that made things, sold things, and paid dividends. He had an uncanny knack for reading the stock market, almost like a financial wizard. What began as modest investments soon filled his safe deposit box with a growing collection of stock certificates. He was methodical, dividing his funds into separate categories and spreading his investments across many companies. Instead of betting big on a few, he chose to invest smaller amounts in several. This strategy protected him. If one stock failed, the loss was minimal and never enough to derail his financial progress. Over decades, he bought shares in trusted giants like Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan, and Johnson & Johnson. He didn't trade. He didn't time the market. He just bought, held, and reinvested. Ronald didn't talk much about money, but in private, he was doing what many on Wall Street failed to do. He was beating the market quietly, consistently, and with stunning patience. He wasn't a day trader. He didn't chase fads. He didn't obsess over market timing. In fact, Ronald Read followed a strategy so simple, most people overlook it. Buy quality companies, hold them for decades, reinvest the dividends, and never panic. He focused on blue chip stocks, large stable companies with long track records of paying dividends. He wasn't interested in the next big thing. He wanted businesses that made real products, served real customers, and could weather economic storms. He read newspapers daily, studied company reports, and watched markets with a quiet intensity. While others listened to hype, he listened to fundamentals. One of his smartest moves? Dividend reinvestment. Each time a company paid him a dividend, Ronald used it to buy more shares. Over time, that snowballed into hundreds of thousands, then millions of dollars. He didn't diversify wildly. He simply chose a handful of solid companies, held them, and let time do its magic. He avoided debt, avoided lifestyle inflation, and avoided fear. While others were busy looking rich, Ronald was quietly becoming rich. He understood something most people never learn. Wealth isn't built by luck. It's built by discipline, patience, and belief in long-term value. Ronald hadn't just turned his janitor's wage into a multi-million-dollar legacy. He was leaving behind a legacy for his family and community that would leave them shell-shocked. By the time he passed away in 2014, at the age of 92, Ronald had amassed a portfolio worth over $8 million. And get this, no one, not his friends, not even his family, knew. They assumed that the money he was making as a janitor was barely enough for him to get by. He wasn't just investing money, he was investing in a future no one saw coming. When the truth came out, Ronald Read had left behind a fortune and over $8 million in carefully chosen stocks and investments. The headlines called him the secret millionaire. His small New England town was stunned. The man who clipped coupons at the diner, the man who drove an old rusted pickup, the man who never showed off, never said a word, had quietly become one of the wealthiest people in the region. But what he did next was even more powerful than the fortune itself. Ronald had donated over $6 million to his local hospital and library, places that had touched his life, and now would be changed forever by his generosity. He didn't want recognition, he wanted impact. Ronald Reed's legacy wasn't just in the wealth he built, it was in the lives he touched long after he was gone. Ronald Reed never looked rich, and he never cared to. But his mindset, that's where the real wealth lived. He believed in living below his means, saving diligently, investing patiently, and letting time do the heavy lifting. He didn't chase trends. He didn't try to impress. He focused on what truly mattered: freedom, security, and generosity. Ronald Reed walked among millionaires every day, and no one knew he was one of them. Not because he was hiding, but because he didn't need to be seen to feel successful. Ronald Reed's story reminds us that wealth isn't always loud, that generosity doesn't need applause, and that greatness can wear a flannel and drive a rusted truck. In the end, Ronald Reed didn't just leave behind millions of dollars, he left behind a powerful message. You don't need to be born into money, wear a suit, or have a fancy title to build a meaningful life. All you need is intention, patience, and the courage to live differently.